And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey there, this is Who is Jon Ray with Jack Peterson. And a little backstory on Jack and I. We met through a mutual friend of ours who is a coach several years ago. And, you know, I think that a lot of men, especially in the circles that we run with, are kind of having this awakening or this breaking out experience where they're having a larger truth revealed to them. And so one of the things that I want to talk about is, what does it mean to be a man in today's day and age, and how can we do that more consciously? And then what are some of the tools that we can add to our toolkit? And Jack is a coach working with men in several different aspects. So Jack, hi, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, so I guess I always like to start by just asking, describe your mood level. How are you feeling right now?
I feel my energy rising a little bit, which means I feel a little bit anxious.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who are you?
Who am I? That is a great question. And one question that I've been exploring deeply for the past, I would say, 8 years. But I'm constantly learning about myself. Even today, I learned a lot about myself this morning.
Yeah, when you're learning from yourself and when you're getting kind of feedback from reality, what is that experience like for you, or how do you interpret those things and determine, I think I just learned something about myself?
I would say it's a feeling for me. Whenever I'm expanding myself and learning more about who I really am, I feel really alive, and I feel really connected, and I feel really excited and joyful.
Yeah, because, I think there are people listening that, you hear in metaphysical circles, oh, I'm expanding my energy, I'm expanding. And for somebody who maybe is just getting started, they may not have the context for what exactly that means. And so like you're saying for you, like it's almost like a lifting of spirits or energy, or maybe like a feeling like you're more securely grounded maybe. Can you expand a little bit more on the concept of expansion and in practical terms, like how somebody might experience expansion or know that they are having an expansion experience?
That's a great question. I would guess that that's subjective. But for me, I can speak from my experience. It's honestly the best feeling in the world. It's like that feeling when you remember you were a kid, and those moments when you're having so much fun that you totally lose sense of time, right? And maybe you're having fun with your friends or your loved ones, and the whole day just flew by, and it was such an enjoyable day. For me, some people call it the flow, some people call it love. I think there's all kinds of words you can use for it. But for me, it's almost hard to describe the feeling, because when I'm in that state, I'm so in it that I'm not even aware of how I'm feeling.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that there was a time in my life where I felt like maybe flow was just a random thing, like you lucked into having flow. And one of the interesting things about, the metaphysical community and kind of the conscious seeking community is that, at least my interpretation of it is that we are a group of people who are actively learning how to train flow, to find those flow states and to be in those flow states more often. And I think a lot of the emotional work, the processing work, the energy work, even expanding the levels of awareness, at least for me personally, and a lot of the people that I'm working with, the purpose of that is to be in this kind of ease of existence, or this flow state where time and space almost disappear, and you're kind of, in sports it's called being in the zone. You're in the zone more often. Is that how you work with men? Are you helping them get into the zone?
Pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much the end goal. Because when you're in that state, I believe it's who we really are. And who we really are is who we are being when we are not in fear, when we're not suppressing ourselves, when we're not still connected to emotional wounding and traumas of the past, when we break free from that, so to speak, in the present moment as much as possible. Yeah. And a lot of what I'm researching lately is about vulnerability, because for me personally, vulnerability has completely transformed my life. Learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to expose myself emotionally, and sharing those uncomfortable parts of myself that when I was younger, I refused to do because it felt uncomfortable.
Yeah, can you give me an example of what that would look like in kind of day-to-day practice?
Cool.
Because I feel like, you hear when you're watching, these like personal growth videos, oh yeah, it's about finding a space of being more vulnerable. But if you don't have a context for what that means, or you haven't experienced it, I think sometimes that can be difficult to understand, one, what being vulnerable means, and two, why that would be a valuable thing.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that I believe vulnerability is now becoming a trend, where people are catching on to it and are starting to realize the power of vulnerability. But now it's starting to turn into a trend, like I said, and almost an ego-created thing, where instead of actually being vulnerable, it's an act of it's a state of acting like you're being vulnerable.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like this facade or this act that you put on in order to get social approval.
Yeah.
But you're not actually being vulnerable because you're doing it with the intention to be perceived in a certain way, rather than the way that I think about vulnerability is, I heard a really interesting interpretation of the word meek from the Bible. Jesus in the Bible talks about the meek will inherit the earth. And meek is sometimes seen as like small or poor or even weak. And the way that meek, or at least it was explained to me, the way that meek translates from the Greek and Hebrew is actually a meek is like a warrior who is so confident in knowing of their ability to be a powerful warrior that they never have to pull their sword out of its sheath. So meek means you know how to use your sword, but you never have to remove it from your belt.
I like that a lot.
And for me, like being vulnerable is similar. It's like knowing that, because it's counterintuitive. Like when you think vulnerable, you think, oh, human beings are really vulnerable because we have this open abdomen here. And so in evolutionary standards, like we don't have a shell or anything, like our bodies are very vulnerable. And I think maybe that is part of the reason that psychologically we're so protective, is because we do live in this meat sack that can very easily be cut to threads or thrashed by some kind of a predator. And energetically, I feel like that's... Our body is basically the representation of how vulnerable our energy can be, but there's some interesting sweet spot, at least from my current interpretation, where you can become so knowing of yourself as this kind of all-powerful spiritual being that you don't have to put up any guards because you have learned how to let life fully move through you and it's like I've called it becoming transparent to life. Like true vulnerability is just letting life storm on you and allowing it to clear or bring up whatever emotional reaction needs to happen so that you can become even more transparent. You're cleaning off the emotional window so that more light can flow through you. And so in that way, it's like removing the barriers is like cleaning the mud on the window so that more light can come through. The window is probably more protected if it has 6 inches of clay plastered over it, but no light can get through. And the paradox is that when more light is coming through, the window is actually stronger than when it has a huge protective barrier around it. Is that making sense or resonating?
Absolutely, yeah. That makes sense because I do a lot of that work in my own life. And I've gone through experiences many times intentionally so that I could release old emotions that were holding me back. And on the topic of vulnerability, where that showed up for me was in intimacy. I mean, how can you be more vulnerable than, let's say, with someone you love? And so in my intimate life with women was where all of this showed up for me. That's not how it shows up for everybody. And so I had to move through a lot of my stuck emotions, that gunk on the, what did you say? On the
window.
Yeah, on the windshield. And actually feel through that in the moment with the other person, which made it like 100 times more scary. And allow myself to move through it in the present moment, in all of my terror, Can
you take a second and give me a more specific example of what that looks like?
Oh, that's a great. Let's see. Well, this example is coming to my mind right now. For some reason, on my journey of, learning about myself and becoming more of who I really am, part of my journey, especially so in my relationships with women, was I would get to this point in my dating and romantic life where on a date, it would usually happen where I would have this like really strong urge to kiss the woman, and I would get stuck, and I wouldn't act on it. I wouldn't share it, and I would just kind of act like it wasn't happening because I felt like it wasn't okay, like it wasn't appropriate, like I would scare her, like I was being a predator or something, and creepy or. So that kept showing up over and over and over. This like particular year, I think it was like 2013 or something. It was really interesting. So it wasn't until I actually started talking directly to these women about it that I was able to work through it. And multiple times actually, the women were like, "I know,"
because they're so much more intuitive than we ever give them credit for.
Super intuitive and super sensitive. And one of the greatest lessons I learned with women was that I can't hide anything from them. And so honestly, women have been one of the greatest teachers for me, to be the fullest expression of myself because I couldn't hide anything from them.
Right. And so why even try? It's like I sometimes call that like a mirror relationship or having a mirror presence with someone. And for me, it can be men or women, but oftentimes just because of the nature of a heterosexual relationship, you end up having it with a woman. And it's this interesting experience where however they're showing up is vividly mirroring something within yourself. And so rather than trying to fix it in them, you see it as an opportunity to fix it in you. And then you watch that play out in the relationship. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to move through it as gracefully as I did. It honestly wasn't very graceful, actually. It was definitely a bumpy ride. But I did have a mentor at the time who was teaching me all this stuff that we're talking about.
So how did you learn how to lean in and go for that kiss? You talked about having these conversations. That takes a lot of courage and guts to be able to honestly share, hey, I want to kiss you, but I'm not. Where did that courage come from? And for somebody who, is going through a similar experience, how can they muster whatever it takes inside to actually be proactive in that moment?
Yeah. So this is really the core of the work that I do. with my clients and in my own life is in those moments we have a choice, and we can choose courage to do the thing that's uncomfortable but we know it's the right thing to do, or we can not. And the beautiful thing about moving into courage, even though it's the scariest thing, always, it's always scary. That's the part of the definition of courage, in my opinion. Every time we do it, we become more confident on the other side, but we have to go through it. There are no shortcuts.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the way that I've always seen it in my mind is like these concentric rings of experience. And each ring is like this game that you're playing, or this level of reality that you're operating at. And as a protective measure, each ring has this kind of electronic barrier around it, and that barrier registers in our emotional system as fear, and that's saying, hey, don't expand yourself too much more, or don't move too much further, because it's going to be difficult to play at the next level. Your current skill set is only developed enough for you to operate within the concentric ring that you're in right now. But if you use fear as a guide to point you to where the next biggest ring is at, then it's almost like you make this contract with reality, where reality says, if you're willing to step into your fear and feel that fear fully, I promise you that there will be a bigger experience on the other side. And that's always the case. And so fear, instead of being something to avoid, becomes this really interesting guide or mechanism to point you in the exact direction you should be going. And one of the things that I, with my own clients, I'd be interested to hear how people show up for you is that, you know, if somebody is feeling stagnant or feeling bored in their life, almost always it's because they are actively avoiding something that is scary. And if we put together a list of what are the scariest things in your life, all of a sudden we can ramp up the excitement and adventure in their life real quick. But it requires the guts to actually look at what am I afraid of, and then the courage to step into it.
Absolutely. And yeah, learning how to face fear has honestly defined how I live my life. It's like once you experience the aliveness of like courageously moving into your fears, like you'll never go back. And if you don't, if you do go back, you're going to be miserable because like, yeah, I check in with how I'm feeling, every day or whatnot. And if I'm ever feeling stuck, like you said, it's because I'm not facing a fear. So yeah, that's exactly what I do with my clients. And I remember this one client I worked with. He had this like really deep fear, and it was that his mother was an alcoholic, and he felt very like ashamed of that. And amazingly, it was the thing that was getting in the way of his ability to experience a fulfilling relationship with a woman. And it was the reason why they were leaving him, is because he wasn't being fully transparent with who he is and his vulnerability. And so when like I said, you can't hide anything from a woman, especially a very sensitive, in tuned woman. So that was the biggest lesson for him, was to learn how to open up about that.
And is it just a matter of communicating where you're at? Because what I hear you saying is, in that particular experience, moving through the fear wasn't necessarily, dealing directly with the shame on his own, but rather having the courage to express that shame. And in that expression, it kind of dissolved. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. And I gave him a really pretty big challenge in one of our sessions. It was in person, and we were in the one of the parks at the UC Berkeley campus. And during the session, what we were talking about was his greatest fear, which is basically sharing that with another human being. the thing that he's most ashamed of. And so I gave him the challenging task to go up and approach a complete stranger in the park and just tell her.
Interesting. And was he able to do that?
He was. After a good 15, 20 minutes of resisting it, I kind of gave him lots of pep talks, and he went and did it. And to this day, he's like, I'm so grateful. Like, I'll never forget that day when you had me go approach that stranger and tell her the most vulnerable thing.
Yeah.
And she like accepted me and was like compassionate towards me, and it was amazing.
That's interesting. Now, I think there's two ways that I see people dealing with fear in kind of the conscious community. One is kind of this power of positive thinking approach where you do so much pre-roll work, which is like visualization of things going the way that you want it and being received properly, and running all of these kind of imaginary scenarios where your expression, your future expression of something that you don't want to express is received so vividly that you actually dissolve the fear, and then it becomes very easy to just go and do it. And so you're not necessarily even afraid of doing it anymore. That's one route that I used to use all the time. I wouldn't act unless I had already dissipated all of the fear, because I wanted to make sure that I was in alignment with all of my actions. Then more recently, in the last couple of years, I just started ripping the Band-Aid off and saying, I'm afraid of this. I'm just going to go and do it and go on the other side. And that was like accelerating the process. It took a lot more courage, but I got addicted to the dopamine hit that comes along with stepping up to something unknown and then moving through it. And that became such a powerful practice for me, and such a much more accelerated practice, that I stopped doing so much of the pre-roll, pre-visualization work and started just moving directly into the fear. I think that, depending on where people are at, they can approach it in the way that feels right for them in the moment. But do you have a way that you kind of help determine whether somebody should just rip the Band-Aid off, or whether there's a little bit more pre-roll work that needs to happen before they can do it?
I would allow them the choice. Absolutely. I am not even necessarily against doing things in a really messy way. I think one of the most important things, actually, especially in this day and age for humanity, small topic here, is to allow ourselves to be more human.
Yeah.
And as humans, we're imperfect. We're imperfect. Yeah. We're vulnerable. We're messy. We're emotional. All these things. According to Brene Brown, in this amazing book, Daring Greatly, she talks about how we are now in a culture of scarcity, where basically it's common for everyone to not feel good enough, not feel smart enough, not feel certain enough. Just not enough. I'm not enough. And in this culture, what it's creating is all of these things, all of these ways that we armor ourselves from being who we really are, from being vulnerable, basically. And one particular way is perfectionism, is actually something we use that we've learned from our culture. That we always got to have our shit together. We always got to, look good, and we always got to know what to say. We always got to know all of the, the sources or whatever, the arguments, so that we can be right all the time. But in the process, we're losing our humanity, and we're losing our ability to actually connect with each other.
Yeah. And we're preventing ourselves from getting valuable feedback, is the way that I see it. I talk a lot to people about how I don't believe that it's possible to actually make a mistake. The only mistake is not recovering quickly enough. And one thing that great entrepreneurs will always talk about is how you want to make mistakes quickly, frequently, and then recover from them quickly, because that's how you're going to grow and evolve. And I think that, humanity is very similar, where you actually have a much more expansive experience when you allow yourself to make the mistake, knowing that you will have the wherewithal and awareness required to recover from that mistake. And if you can make sure that you're in a position to glean that awareness quickly and then reinvent yourself based on what you learned from the feedback that came from that mistake, is it really a mistake, or is it the stepping stone that was required for you to get to where you want to get? And so I try to run headfirst into reality now as quickly as I can and let as many mistakes happen as need to happen, knowing that it would be impossible for something to happen that would be unrecoverable. And I think that can sometimes be controversial because you see things happen where clearly it looks like it was a mistake, but in the more macro view, was it? Or did that allow someone to have a catalyst moment that was needed for them to reinvent themselves?
Absolutely. And I would say I've been thinking and meditating a lot on, like, what do I want to see more of in the world? And the whole idea of, like, what does it mean to be a man? Like, I believe that whole conversation is evolving every day as we speak. And I think you explained it very well. Something I would like to see a lot more of in the world is people being able, like, willing to fail and, like, be in the ring instead of being a spectator. I would love to see more people, being willing to be vulnerable and put themselves out there courageously. And like you said, it's learning how to recover from that.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Well, there's this image that I refer to a lot in chaos theory, and basically what the image is you've got this hourglass that is dropping sand into a mound. And so drop by drop, grain by grain, the sand is falling and creating this tiny little mound or mountain of sand in the bottom of the hourglass. And that mountain keeps getting bigger and bigger, and everything looks great with that mound. The mound is forming, it's becoming bigger, it's looking more and more impressive. And at some point, the weight of the sand on the top of the mound becomes so heavy that the mound collapses into itself, and it looks like all hell has broken loose and chaos ensues. And in that chaos, what's happening is the mound is restructuring its base to be a larger, stronger, more compact base so that the sand continuing to fall can now form a bigger mound. And I see what we're talking about, the ability to make mistakes, similar to us creating a larger and stronger foundation for humanity. It's going to look chaotic when more and more people start doing that. And that's why people are afraid to do it, because they, in a 140 character social media driven world, it's often difficult to see what the long-term goal or the sacrifice that we're having right now, how that's pointing to a better future. And interestingly enough, the chaos that we're seeing right now, I think, is the result of more people becoming conscious. Chaos is the natural byproduct of people waking up, because the mound then collapses into itself, restructures its base in a more solid way so that we can grow in an even larger format moving forward. But when we're short-sighted, all we see is the collapsing mound and all the chaos that ensues. And so I'd love to kind of hear if that resonates with you, and if so, how that's maybe played out in your own life.
That totally resonates 100%. I do believe that collectively right now we are either in the middle of or heading towards the chaos part of this.
We're not even there yet?
I don't know if we're even there yet. It might get real crazy. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely is getting crazy. Let's see. I completely agree with that. And it's a great reminder to look at it from that lens, because then we realize that in order to create a better world that I definitely want to be a part of, I mean, I'm committed to that, we have to allow the old to crumble down. And I think this is happening on a global scale right now. I believe the ways that, I don't know, corporations do things, government, like everything is changing right now. Also the way, I actually can't think of many specific examples right now. Let's see.
Well, it's interesting to me because I agree that if we're not in it, we're definitely moving towards a complete reframe of reality. And that can sound like a scary thing. Like there's a lot of people, depending on the lens that you look at it through, that see this as kind of a doom gloom end of time scenario.
Yeah.
And what I always try to show people is that smart investors have a tendency to make more money on a downturn than they do on an upturn. If you play the game correctly and structure your position within a recession, right, you can always gain more in the middle of chaos. And I've actually been, a phrase that I've been using to myself, because I'm purposely choosing chaos in my life right now. I'm trying to step into the most chaotic situations I can to showcase that my own integrity will organize that chaos. And one of the things that I constantly am repeating to myself is chaos is the shortcut. It's like, yeah, you can avoid the chaos and you can put up a lot of walls and you can channel and funnel and protect yourself in a way where the chaos doesn't have to get you. But it's an awful lot of work to do that. And it's like having to walk all the way around the battlefield in order to get to the other side, where the faster way is to just go straight through the middle. And I get the sense that the more in integrity we are with truth, whatever that means, and this kind of soul version of ourselves, the more integrity we are with that, the more that our very presence standing in that integrity orders the chaos around us and opens up a shortcut to where we want to go. And I say that because I don't want people to think that we're all doom and gloom. I do agree that like things are going to get more chaotic. We haven't even seen, the chaos that we're heading into, and that there's potentially going to be massive ramifications that show up as almost a crumbling of society. But in that crumbling, it's important to recognize that new ideas always come out of contrast, and better ideas are usually inspired by contrast. So in that crumbling, there's an opportunity to be a way shower to what is the future, what is the better future that is birthed out of this, and the phoenix that arises from the ashes. And, I want to make sure that I'm calling attention to the fact that I'm very hopeful about the future long term, even though short term, I think that it will manifest in a way that seems like all hell is breaking loose.
Yeah. I think that's why a lot of conspiracy theories and alternative news sources are portraying that, like doomsday, like nuclear bombs, all kinds of stuff, blah, blah, blah. There probably is some probability that some horrible things could happen. But it's like, I do believe we create our reality, and I do believe that we're all co-creating this experience. And so, I can listen to the mainstream news, which is pumping fear into onto our TV screens and our newspaper every single day. Or I can listen to conspiracy theorists, which is pumping fear into our brains every single day. Or I can be more solution focused. And it's like, okay, well, if all these horrible things are happening, it's actually not affecting me that much. And so it's like, how, and I believe we are these very powerful beings, actually. And I believe that we can actually make a huge difference just by transforming ourselves into being the best version of ourselves and living the lives that we really want to live and getting in touch with what we really want and actually taking action towards that. I think will create a better world.
And you said something that feels important to me. The life that we really want. It feels to me like where most people get stuck is that they've lost sight of what they actually want. And when that happens, you become the cog in the wheel of someone else's desire. And it's really important, at least from my perspective, to recenter yourself in what it is that you actually want. And that sometimes means tracing back to when you were a kid, like what was the thing that you wanted to do back then? You know, were you writing short stories or you know, the kid in the garage that was tinkering with all the bikes? Like, did you want to be a mechanic, but you felt like you had to have a white collar job? Like, I think that we've been driven as a society to meet someone else's desire and be the cogs in the wheel of someone else's desire. And there's an interesting opportunity, especially with the internet and the way that it allows all of us to kind of build our own tribe and audience, to be reaffirmed in what it is that you actually want to do, and then find a community that will support you in that true desire. Mm-hmm. I'd be curious to hear how you help people understand, like, what is it that they actually want, and then how can they get it?
Yeah. Well, I basically ask them, what do you want? And I keep asking them a bunch of questions about it. Maybe they haven't even sat for a moment to even consider it in maybe like 2 decades or longer.
Yeah.
Because we're just so in the rat race of just every normal day life. And I'm huge about questioning everything. Because growing up, like, without questioning everything, I became depressed, sad, lonely, miserable. And so I guess luckily for me, in some sick way, I learned the extreme value of knowing what I want. And that's, for me, that's really the only thing that makes me happy.
Yeah. It's that questioning everything. I like to think of that as living a contemplative life. It's being incredibly observant of what I'm doing in the world and what's happening around me, and then always asking, why am I showing up in this way? What's the real reason that I'm showing up in this way? Because there's a tendency to get so put on autopilot that you end up being in autopilot for 10 years and you think that you're doing something you want to do, when in actuality, when you actually contemplate the reasons why you're doing it, it's something that is completely skewed from your actual desire. And I think that question of why am I doing this? Every single segment of my day, why am I doing this? That can be a really powerful way to open up your reality and see it from a perspective that maybe has never shown itself before. And then all kinds of interesting things can start happening. Do you have some moment in your life where you maybe ask that question why, and you realize that the answer you got was different than what you were expecting?
Oh, when I asked myself,
mm-hmm.
Why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm sure. I mean, I can't think of a specific example, but I ponder that question probably maybe on a daily basis. Why am I doing what I'm doing? So, and I always get something from it.
Yeah. It's like, for me, I recognized that I was very much a people pleaser. And as long as the people around me were happy, I was happy. Or I thought I was happy because there was no conflict. It was like as long as everybody around me was happy and we were all having a good time and there was no conflict, that was a picture of success for me. But the more that I contemplated, why am I doing the things that I'm doing, the more that I realized that really I was terribly afraid of disappointing the people that were closest to me. And I had spent my entire early adult life supporting their dreams and visions so that they could get off the ground and do the things that they wanted to do, and I could partake in some of their happiness and success. And I never wanted to confront how I thought it might feel if I was no longer part of their support system in as big a way as I had presented myself. And so I didn't want to walk away from certain people because I didn't want them to be disappointed in me. And so the actual reason that I was continuing to do some of the things that I was doing was a fear of disappointing someone and not my actual desire. And at some point I had to find the courage to say, you know what? I think I want to move in a different direction. And I had to make peace with the fact that no one needs you. No one needs you to live their dream. Like, the creative components are always going to show up for people in the way that they need them to show up. And if I walk away from a project, maybe that person will be disappointed at first because they've become socially addicted to me fulfilling a role for them. But that addiction will pass, and they'll either find someone else to meet it or they'll learn to feel through that addiction themselves. But it's more important for me to constantly say, am I doing this because it's actually something I believe in? Or am I just afraid that somebody's going to be mad if I stop doing this?
Yeah, I think the age-old question is, am I living from fear or love right now?
Yeah.
And another great question is, well, what would love do? If I truly, fully, completely love myself, what would I actually do? And a huge part of that is getting clear with what you want. I have realized only in the past few years how much of a people pleaser I am too. And that has been a huge realization for me, because similarly, I realized, honestly, how much my perception of what my family's view is towards me has ruled my life and my decisions. And one of the biggest challenges I've faced lately is, my sister and my mom and my dad at times totally disagreeing how I'm living my life, and just not feeling understood by them. And so that takes continual courage to move through and to not let my people-pleasing tendencies take over, and to just keep living the life that feels right for me, and doing that as best as I possibly can, and really saying no to the haters.
Yeah, you got to shake them haters off.
Yeah.
So in practice, if somebody comes to you whose approval you want, but they are blatantly not giving it to you, how do you deal with that disheartening event?
Whew, yeah, that can be really painful. It's challenging. I would say just allowing. It's courage. It takes courage. And what's the word? It's kind of resiliency. Staying true to myself. And I would say, luckily, that's one of my greatest strengths is staying committed to my own inner voice. Ever since I've gotten in touch with how to connect to my inner voice, I pretty much never budge too much.
What does that mean, your inner voice? How would you describe that?
I would describe it as the deepest part of me.
So it's a feeling-based thing.
Yeah, it's deep down. I connect to this place, usually when I'm alone, when I'm meditating, or just I'm alone and there's no one else around, and so I can kind of get in touch with what's really important to me.
It's like maybe the thoughts or the voice or the expression that lives underneath all of the falsities, perhaps?
Exactly. Yeah. Beneath the people pleasing, beneath the limiting beliefs, beneath the limiting thoughts.
And I think from what I know about your work, and definitely in my own work, that's really where we're helping people, is get underneath all of that garbage that is in the way of people hearing their true inner voice, or that truth that lives within all of us, and bring that to the surface so that they're more consciously aware of that. And, talking about like handling really uncomfortable situations, I agree with you that it requires an intense amount of courage. But for me, where courage comes from, and maybe courage is step 2. Maybe the first step is humility. Like, for me, I define humility as being willing to feel all of your feelings fully in your body and not bypassing them. And so I believe that the law of attraction gives us this kind of mirror experience where reality is always trying to get us to release some energetic blockage or samskara within our energy system. And so if my dad or my mom or my uncle or somebody I care about comes and is blatantly telling me that I'm wrong or that my dream is wrong or putting me down in some way, to me, if that triggers me, that trigger is a sign that I still am holding that perception of myself within my energy field. And so that event is a gift to me to be able to really feel into my central nervous system how that affects me. Instead of trying to make a joke and laugh it off and be like, "Oh, Dad, you're so crazy, you never get behind me," it's actually more important to let that event move as deeply into your body as you can, and burn out whatever energy blockage lives there, because the event is designed to burn out the samskara if we'll let it. And I know earlier we were talking about how you're really in tune with your body and like listening for where the sensitivities in your energy field are. Can you talk a little bit about, on a daily basis, what listening to your body looks like?
Yeah, it's just bringing my awareness inwards. That's really all it is. And just feeling my body, bringing my awareness, to my feet, and then just all areas of my body, and just being like, whoa, what am I feeling right now? And then receiving that information and being like, oh, I've feel lightheaded right now. And then it's like, oh, well, what should I do about that? Maybe I should take a nap, or maybe I should take a break right now, maybe I should get off the computer, or whatever that might be.
Yeah. It's in my practice, one of the awarenesses that I had was I thought that I was really in tune with myself, but what I realized was that I was living almost completely in a mental dimension and was completely out of touch with even how my body felt at all, because everything was being filtered through that mental dimension. And so one of the things that I started doing in my meditations, as I was taking a deep breath in, letting it out, taking a deep breath in, letting it out, I would say, okay, what does my hand feel like right now? And I would spend at least 60 seconds, sometimes longer, just trying to feel what my hand feels like. How does my hand feel? Okay, how does my arm feel? And I'd send all of my attention, how does my arm feel? Okay, how do my shoulders feel? And then I'd spend a good 10 or 15 breaths just feeling, how do my shoulders feel? Okay, how does my other arm feel? And I'd send all of my attention to that arm. How does my left hand feel? How do my legs feel? How do my feet feel? How do my toes feel? How do my ears feel? How do my nose feel? And then I'd say, okay, how does all of that feel collectively when I put that feeling together? And I can remember vividly laying on the carpet of one of my old apartments and being like, oh my God, I'm feeling my body. It was like this really interesting experience where for the first time, I had taken all of those bits of attention that I had given to all these things, and I was feeling it as a cohesive whole that was my body. And it was the first time I was interpreting reality from my body upwards instead of my head downwards. And so I would encourage anyone listening that doesn't really know what we're talking about for like feeling something in your body and being in tune with your body, maybe in your meditation, just try to say, what does my thumb feel like? And just sit with that for a couple of minutes and see if you can have a conscious awareness of what your thumb feels like. It sounds so stupid and kind of hippy-dippy, but you can actually have this experience. And then the interesting thing is that once you become really, at least for me, once you become really good at feeling your body and the different parts of your body. Like you can go internally too. What do my lungs feel like? What does my liver feel like? And you can have a tangible sensation of what those different organs feel like, and are they in alignment? But then you can also learn to project that outwards, and you can say, what does this tree feel like? And now you start to have this sensory experience where your sensory system is expanding beyond your body. And that's what I'm more and more trying to experience with it, is having this more tangible experience of energy as a whole, and not buying into the limitations or confines of the body, recognizing it, being aware that I'm in a vehicle that I call a body, but also knowing that my awareness can expand beyond that. And so as you're tuning into yourself and looking for those sensitivities, what does that interpretation look like? You said, oh, maybe I need to slow down. What would be a manifestation in your body that would trigger you to maybe slow down?
Well, today I was getting a sensation that I've never felt before, actually. And it was almost like a sharp lightning bolt feeling it wasn't my left side from my heart. It was like the right side of my chest, which was very strange. And it almost like shot into my head and for a moment. And I was like, whoa, what's that? And just the intuitive thing that I got was just like, slow down, Jack. Like, take it easy.
Yeah. Something that's been really important to me, especially lately, has been journaling as well, because I think that most of the people that I talk to about this think that they're having more linear thoughts than they are. They're having this feeling interpretation and they feel like it's linear, but they're really not getting very clear on what the feeling is. And one of the things that I learned from the book The Artist Way was having your morning pages. You write at least 750 words every single morning. And one of the things that I try to do, based on some of the coaching practices that I do, is that every morning I sit down with a notepad and I write at the top of the page, describe your mood level, kind of like how we started the presentation podcast. And I describe my mood level. Oh, I'm feeling a little bit groggy and tired. I'm feeling like, my leg feels tense. I'm a little bit worried about this thing coming up. I'm fearful that I'm not going to have everything I need for this meeting. That's this afternoon. I'm getting all my accurate, true expressions out of how I'm actually feeling, and I'm giving it a linear interpretation. And then I keep asking myself, describe your mood level, until I can honestly say, ooh, I'm really enthusiastic about going out into the world today.
Yeah.
When I can honestly say that, then that's when I put the pen and paper down and I actually go out into the world. And it's interesting how on a daily basis, the sense that I get is that I fill up with all of these concerns or energetic blocks or discordant energy. And it's important for me on a daily basis to express that discordant energy so that it gets out of my body. And once I release it out of my body, it doesn't have to live in my body anymore. And so then my body doesn't have to act as an energetic mechanism that's calling to me manifestations to show me that it's still in my body. Is that making sense?
I think so. Yeah.
It's like the body as a mechanism is this magnet or that creates the field around me that I perceive as reality. And that movie of reality, so maybe my body is like this film projector, and the movie around me is reality. And based on what energetic blockages or discordance I have in my body, that determines how the movie is going to show up for me, because the movie of reality is trying to get my energy field to be as clear as possible so that I can receive love in the largest way or format available. And so if I can get that discordant energy out of me by writing it into a journal in the morning, I no longer have to have reality show it to me out here because I've already shown it to myself. So something that I always try to get people to do, especially, if they're just looking for something, they can't afford coaching, or aren't resonating with that type of relationship right now. I always say go buy a journal, like buy a yellow legal pad, and every single morning just write what comes into your mind. Like if you need a prompt, use describe your mood level. But you can also just start writing whatever's in your head. I'm looking at a cup right now. It has tea in it. Getting those loose thoughts out or learning to interpret your feelings in a linear way can be a really powerful way to have stronger intuitions.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how your intuitions show up for you and maybe how you act upon those?
Yeah. Well, first off, the times when it's most powerful to do that those journaling exercises is, it's powerful every day, honestly, but especially when I just don't feel good. You know, that those mornings when you're just like, fuck, fuck me. And then, these like thoughts, these like gremlins start coming into your brain, just like, oh, you suck, or like whatever they are, like, oh man, like just today's gonna be a terrible day, and just like all this stuff. And then like writing all that out and just like, I hate myself, like today sucks, like blah blah blah, whatever the worst thoughts are. And then you just get all that out, and then I just write like, how do I want to feel? And I was like, joyful, playful, creative, blah blah blah. And then I'm like, yeah, okay, joy, yeah, okay. And then I'm like, and then it literally changes the entire course of the whole day. And then I do like a Facebook Live, and I just did this crazy thing this morning where I'm gonna just dance on live video. I'm like, boom, Facebook Live. And I was just like dancing with this like ridiculous cowboy hat, and just like, we need to experience more joy in our lives. And I've been studying in this Brene Brown book. She talks about how it's according to her research, it's really hard for humans to actually let ourselves experience like true joy because it feels vulnerable at the same time. Because when we're in a really joyful, blissful state, we really lose complete sense of who we think we are. And it's a really vulnerable state to be in.
And it's also like, you don't want somebody to pull you down. It's so easy to have somebody pull you down, and it's like, ooh, if I can be closer to where everybody else is at, it's like I'm more secure. Like I'm not as vulnerable to be pulled down and have the fall be so big.
Exactly. And I think especially in our culture, like I'm just thinking of like high school. It's just like, let's say back in high school, like I'm going fully into my joy, and then some cool guy's just like, Jack, you look like a dumbass, and just could just drop you so hard. And it can be a really traumatic experience.
Yeah. And, that's, for me, that's why I really like this context that I've been experimenting with, where everything is showing me a blockage within my nervous system that needs to be cleared. Because if the guy in high school says something to me and it triggers me in a certain way, well, that's actually a gift. Like I can use that as the catalyst event to let that feeling burn itself out within me. And then the next time it happens, maybe it won't sting as much, or maybe I won't have a reaction at all to it. Or maybe because I no longer have that energetic blockage, I'll have the perfect retort that it just feels so empowering. Or the event just won't happen at all, and all of a sudden that person or the type of people that are coming up to me are more supportive. And my experience has been that people can be transformative, and that there is power in giving people the benefit of the doubt. And even if somebody is a complete jackass 99 out of 100 times, I can get them the one time when they're being nice. And I have this experience with everyone. People all the time are like, oh, how can you work with that guy? Or I can't believe you're doing such and such with this person over here. They're so out of alignment, or whatever it is. And I'm like, wow, I've never had that experience with them, because I always get them at a place that resonates with who I am. And one of the reasons that I like chaos as a shortcut is because if I am allowing reality to burn out all of my blockages and using it as this mechanism for becoming more and more in tune and in integrity with who I actually am, all of a sudden I become the anomaly in every single situation, and I get the best version of everyone, and it's a really interesting experience. How I'd be curious to understand how you kind of, as you're navigating reality, like, how do you take the feedback from people that's coming to you, like whether it's random or not? Like, what's your interpretation process?
Well, yeah, you also asked me about intuition a few minutes ago. Like, the further I've gone on this journey, the more precise my intuition and more accurate my intuition becomes. And I've gotten to a place where usually I can feel when intuitively I can feel when their trigger with me is more their thing than with me. And usually it's if I don't even feel any trigger whatsoever.
Right.
That's when I really know. And Amanda and I used to live in Encinitas, California, and there was this conscious community there. I put quotation fingers up because some of the people, I believe, had kind of a conscious mask on, like, or kind of a conscious ego.
Yeah.
Like
a spiritual facade.
Facade. But then when it came down to like doing the real work, what I call it, they wouldn't show up. And an example is, like, I believe someone who's really committed to this path, like you, for example, will see every opportunity of a trigger as, just that, an opportunity to learn and grow even more. And I always feel disappointed when people aren't willing to, let's say, have a trigger clearing conversation. Like, especially when there's triggers from both people. From within, they're like, let's say I feel triggered and then they feel triggered at the same time. I've learned from the past, I went through this year specifically, I think it was 2014, where I intentionally would go up and approach people that I was triggered by. And I would go tell them. I would say like, hey man, and it was really, really nerve-wracking at first.
I love that.
It was super vulnerable because I didn't even know how to put it into words. But I was like, like, hey man, like, I'm having these feelings coming up, and like just taking full responsibility, and like I just feel triggered around you, and I don't even know why, and I just wanted to share that with you and maybe talk through this with you. And then every single time it would be this amazing, like, transformative experience.
Yeah,
and every single time, both ways we would feel super connected with each other.
Yeah,
and so after that, instead of being like that, that one person that you avoid in the room,
right?
Like, oh God, there's like some trigger with them or something. They were like, it was totally fine after that. Like, we felt connected, like magnetized to each other.
Yeah. And it's going back to what we were talking about, where kind of fear is the way to know where you should navigate to. Like, the fear points to the opportunity for growth. And if you can allow yourself the courage and the space to move into that and move through it, it can be this really powerful and transformative experience. But if you avoid it, then the way that I see it show up in myself and in other people is that you start to harbor all of these feelings of resentment. And if you're feeling resentment towards anything, it's not somebody else's fault. It's that you're not expressing what you need to express. Because the resentment is really your body saying you're just holding it all in. You're bottling it up. And if you would just let it out, you'd feel so much better. And that doesn't necessarily always mean that you have to confront the person that you're resenting. Sometimes that might not be the strategy, but something that I do pretty frequently is I'll write an angry letter to that person that I don't mail and just get it out of my body, give that feeling some linear context. And then when I'm not feeling so hurt or resentful towards them, I'll usually have some clarity on how I can then take action and move forward in a way that's in alignment.
Absolutely. I love that. And thanks for that reminder. Because there were situations, for some reason this happened a lot in Encinitas in my experience, but there was multiple occasions where there was someone I felt really triggered by, and they felt triggered with me, clearly, because they basically said it behind my back in some instances. And I reached out to them to like connect and to talk about it and to like move through triggers because these people were all in the coaching industry as well.
Sure.
So I actually assumed that they were like
Ready to
committed
do that.
and like down to do the deepest work that you can do.
Yeah.
And they were like, nope. They're like, no, that's your stuff. No. And they would almost treat me like, oh, poor Jack. Like, Jack's just, he's in his like he needs to learn more or something. And they're like, you need to do your own work, Jack, And that was really painful. But I love that idea to journal about it, to write a letter to them. You don't even have to send it to them. But what I did was meditation, basically, and some various emotional release things that I've done. And actually, in one particular example, the next time I saw this guy in particular, after I did the inner work within myself, like everything was fine, and we were like pretty connected.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it feels like what we keep getting to is how important authentic expression is.
Yeah.
It's like so much gets trapped in this vehicle that we call the body, or this rule set that we call the body. And if we can express, it opens up opportunities. Like a reality will unfold for us or open like a flower as long as we continue to feed it with our authentic expression. Now, I know that you're working with men who are either seeking a relationship or they're in a relationship and trying to figure out like what are the polarity dynamics of that relationship. Tell me a little bit about your relationship, because I know that you are in a romantic relationship, but then you're also business partners with that person. And I get the sense that, are you guys calling each other your twin flame? Can you explain kind of what that dynamic is and maybe what a twin flame is and how some of the things that we're talking about when it comes to authentic expression and not harboring resentment, like how that manifests in your more intimate relationship with your partner?
Yeah. Well, the way I want to start with that is actually pretty deep. So I believe like there's a reality that we're all experiencing, and then there's the words that we use to describe that reality, right? And when we were birthed into this world, we didn't have any words to explain things at first until we learned all those words. So when I first met my beloved Amanda, who's now my wife and business partner, she was seeking her twin flame. That's the words that she used. And all I knew in my mind is I wanted my, let's call it life partner. I wanted a woman to spend my life with, someone who I fully understand and she understands me, and just really deep love. And the term twin flame became a really big trigger for me at the time, because Amanda was just kind of so attached to whatever her idea was behind that phrase twin flame. If you look it up online, there's a lot of definitions. It's actually pretty controversial, but the definitions are basically that it's the not the other half of your soul, but the same soul reincarnated at the same time. So really your ultimate mirror. And you can imagine being around someone who has the same soul as you, that you're often very confronted by who you really are.
Right. Because they're able to very intimately draw out whatever needs to be drawn out.
Yeah. So if you have any like old traumas or triggers or emotional wounding, like all that's going to come out. And you have a choice. Like you can either stick it out and do the deep inner work, or you can, exit. Now, I'm not attached to the phrase twin flame. I think even the word love is a hard thing to put into words. That's why there's so much art created out of love, poetry and whatever, music and all kinds of things. I think that's a better that explains it better, in a way. So I don't like to get attached to the words necessarily. But I met Amanda 4 years ago, and it was a very exciting and challenging road. What was your original question again?
Well, I'm just curious how authentic expression shows up in your intimate relationship with Amanda. And, for people who are in a relationship and maybe are harboring some resentment, which is one of the things that I see often, it might be interesting, if you've had an experience of this, to talk about what a fight looks like in an intimate relationship and how that can play out in a healthy way.
Okay. Yeah, so we definitely went through periods of having ugly fights that were not very mature. But I think we all need to go through that process. And I think it's important to have ugly fights instead of just suppressing everything, which is what our parents did, basically.
Right.
So that was the model that we got. I also had the model, definitely in the male lineage part of my family, we definitely have like some anger for sure that got ugly growing up at certain times. So that definitely came out in my relationship with Amanda. And that has been a great teacher for me, is to learn how to have healthy conflicts, because I want to fully express myself. I don't want to suppress myself, but I also don't want to hurt my partner. And so we've actually worked with mentors, and we've accumulated some really helpful tools to help us through difficult moments with each other, that have allowed us to get to a place of feeling really in harmony with one another. Because as you can imagine, being married and live in the same house and be business partners at the same time can be a lot.
Yeah.
That can be a lot to handle. And there was a point where I didn't know if I could do it, if I could stick it out. It was a breaking point that we had. And once we've learned these tools, and once I've taken even more responsibility for my own emotions and my anger, I've learned how to release my anger on my own, because it is quite a taboo emotion in our society, especially.
Yeah.
And everyone gets all scared, and and there's unhealthy anger, which is a lot more aggressive, and then there's healthy anger, which is really just setting a boundary, basically.
Yeah, the way that I try to use it in my own, because I think you can use anger. It can be a very powerful source of energy when channeled in the right way.
Yes.
And I think there's a big difference between feeling your anger and embodying your anger and projecting your anger. Or avoiding it altogether. So maybe there's three components to it. A lot of people will avoid it at all cost, and these people are very flighty. Like they are constantly trying to avoid conflict because they just can't handle anger. So they're trying to constantly push it away. And then you've got people who can't feel it in the same way. They can't feel it either. Like they're so afraid of feeling it that they have to immediately reflect it back. So it's like they put these mirror shields up that anytime something comes into them that it feels like an angry projection, they immediately project that back. Or anytime they feel like anger is building within them, they haven't developed a large enough circulatory system or nervous system to be able to hold that much energy, so they have to immediately project it back, which comes as reactionary anger. And then the more interesting way to use it is I usually try to say, hey, I'm feeling a lot of anger come up right now. I'd like to take a second to just feel through that. And so sometimes I'll leave the room, and in just a meditative space, I'll let that anger burn itself out in my body. Sometimes I'll write an angry letter and express some of it that way. But other times I'll take a little t-ball bat into the backyard, and I'll just swing that bat into a pile of trash until I've gotten all of that anger out. Not projecting it at my partner or the person who I'm angry at, but really trying to get to the core of that anger. Like, this anger is in me. Why are you in me? You know, really like mad at the anger for being in me, and then but then also like giving it an expression so that it doesn't have to be in me anymore. And then once I feel like that anger is no longer sitting, you know, peaked and primed to attack, it's no longer in a triggered space within my body, then I can go back and revisit the conversation that I'm having. But it's very difficult to have enough awareness to be able to stop yourself before you project your anger. How do you do that?
Yeah, I've learned trial and error. Learned by doing and learned by failing. Lots and lots and lots of failing at first. And I have a lot of, it's actually kind of defined my lifestyle now. Like now I'm really into Qigong and Tai Chi lately, which is really good for me to like learn how to just circulate my energy. And to also get into a relaxed state, to not be so like uptight. And meditation, of course, journaling is great too. But specifically, so with my partner, you know, I'm more of a masculine being. She's a highly feminine creature. I like to call her.
Yeah.
Very feminine. And so honestly, the most triggering thing for the masculine can be a highly feminine being. It's also the most attractive too.
Yeah.
So it's this fascinating combination of being so attracted, but then so triggered sometimes, depending on the moment.
Yeah.
And I'd say just with practice, I've learned how to not let my anger triggers build up too quickly. Because what I've noticed kind of journaling and reflecting is that when I have big outbursts of anger, it's usually like a month in the making. It's like building up day after day over the month until it explodes, until my system, I can't even contain it anymore in my system.
Yeah.
And then it looks really ugly. So it's like, how can I be even more in tune with my body and my emotions in every moment as much as possible so that I can express it right in the moment before it starts building up too high. So then it's like, hey, honey, actually, I need a break right now. Like, I need some quiet time. That's kind of sometimes a boundary that I set, and she gets it. She's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's important. And also setting the precedent before you're in that situation that, hey, you know, in our relationship, would it be all right if, you know, when we're feeling something, we just allow each other the space to go and feel that? And in the moment, maybe we say, hey, I think I need to go and feel something, or I think I need to have some time. Like setting that up before you're in the heated moment, I think can be really important. Because when you're in the heated moment, if the first time you're introducing the concept of, hey, I think I need to go be by myself, sometimes you can get an immediate reaction of, oh, you're just going to leave me now? Totally. But if you've already set that landscape of, hey, I don't ever want to be reacting to you in a way that is flooded, and I would like to give us the space to feel our feelings fully so that we can come to each other authentically instead of from this flooded place of emotion. Setting that up beforehand, I think, can be a really powerful practice so that when things do come to a head, and they should if you're in a highly polarized relationship, you've already kind of set the structure for how you're going to deal with that. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. 100%. And it all comes down to knowledge of self, honestly, because, you know, I've gone from really not knowing who I am and not understanding my emotions and how that works to, wow, especially just within my relationship with Amanda, learning so much about myself and the boundaries that I need for myself to have my needs met, and to learn how to deal with my own emotions and to learn how to train my nervous system to not create toxic experiences and things like that, but to handle it on my own. We've also cultivated ways to communicate with each other in the moment in more of a structured way.
What does that
that we
look
can
like?
go to. Well, one thing we do is we just use like the 3 different colors, or yellow and red. So like yellow's like, okay, like you're starting to trigger me right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then red's like, all right, complete boundary. Like we need to like split for a second,
Yeah.
or just totally stop talking because this is just getting out of hand.
Yeah. That's
That's
an
one thing
interesting.
we do.
Yeah, no, I think that goes back to like setting the infrastructure for how you're going to handle an argument before you're in an argument.
Exactly. Yeah.
That can be really powerful, and a lot of like couples coaching or therapy, I think is, you almost want to go to couples counseling or couples coaching before you're having a problem, because there's so much infrastructure that can be set up that, one, mitigates problems before they start, but then two, gives you all of the tools required to successfully navigate when emotions are high.
Yeah. I think it's extremely important to have tools available. And I believe some people settle to have a different type of relationship, like one that's more like even keeled. Maybe you're a masculine being and you kind of settle for a kind of a masculine partner, because then there's not as much triggers, but there's also not as much attraction.
Yeah.
And I think people settle for those type of relationships. I mean, that's fine if they're really fulfilled with that, but I never was. And so I wanted a polarized relationship where there's a lot of passion and stuff. But definitely in a polarized relationship, I absolutely recommend to have tools.
Can we, for the people listening who maybe don't understand what we're saying when we talk about polarity or polarized, can you talk a little bit about what polarity or the sexual dynamics of polarity look like? And I don't know if that leads into a conversation about David Deda's work or how that plays into some of your coaching, but I'd love to get your perspective on what polarity is and why it's important in a romantic relationship and other relationships.
Yeah, so learning about polarity has been the number one thing that has improved my romantic relationships. Before and the first person I learned about masculine and feminine energy was David Deda. So before coming across his books, I really had no idea what I was doing, and I had no idea how attraction works and things like that. Yeah.
So to give some context, and it's been a while since I've read his books, but David Deda is an author and a coach that is helping people understand the energetic dynamics of relationships and attraction in this thing called polarity. And my understanding of polarity is, the same way that you would think about it in an electrical current. There's a positive charge and a negative charge, and those two charges attract each other the way that a magnet would. And so in that way, the masculine energy and the feminine energy act as these polar opposites that are in attraction. And there are techniques and things that we can do to drive up the frequency of our polarity so that draw or that attraction is stronger in nature. Is that your interpretation?
Absolutely, yeah. And polarity is actually what the universe is made out of. It's what we're made out of.
Yeah, which would make sense if everything is really actually, instead of physical matter, energy, then it would make sense that there would be polarization to that energy, because that's just the natural state of energy. And so what we're talking about is qualities of energy, maybe. And so in all of the qualities of energy, two of the main qualities, from my understanding, are this masculine energy and this feminine energy. And as we ramp up the frequencies of those kind of are integral to the creation process. And when you have somebody who's very strongly in their masculine energy and then someone else who is very strong in their feminine, and this doesn't have to be woman, it could be a very feminine man and a very masculine man, or a very feminine woman and a very masculine woman. We're talking about the energetic quality, not necessarily the biological gender quality. Can you talk a little bit about how you read polarity in your partner, and if if that polarity starts to dwindle, maybe some practices that you use to ramp it back up?
So yeah, I'm more of the masculine partner and she's the feminine for the most part. It is a spectrum, I believe. Like I can be feminine sometimes and that's really fun.
Yeah.
And even feminine people love for me to be feminine too, because it's just a fun state to be in.
Yeah.
But there's this depth and polarity that can be created when I stay firmly in my masculine polarity around feminine beings. And I guess a simple description of, masculine and feminine polarity is the masculine is like pure stillness and pure consciousness. And the feminine is, it's like pure expression, pure creativity. And so the feminine is everything that dances and moves around and everything that is unpredictable. Whereas the masculine is like eternal. It's like always steady, strong. So like a very masculine quality would be someone who has very strong principles and values. It's like eternal, like, authenticity or integrity is, how I live my life.
Yeah, like a code of honor.
Yeah, yeah. And that's something that I'm here to bring back for men again. I think in older times, maybe think of like the Knights of the Round Table, like things like that. Like they had a code of honor and they had things that they committed their life to, and they wouldn't back down. They wouldn't change it. They wouldn't be like, oh, like I committed to protect this person, but I didn't feel like it yesterday, so they got killed or whatever. This just wouldn't be an excuse.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's something that our society at large has lost a lot of, unfortunately.
Yeah. So a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot right now is the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And it's like this idea that, these masculine principles that we're talking about, have served to oppress, many marginalized groups. And I'd be curious to hear how, how do you remain strong in your masculine energy without being seen or perceived as oppressive?
Oh, that's a great one. Nice. When people are saying the patriarchy and they're basically acting like a victim and saying like, this is bad, like that's bad, the patriarchy's bad. They're talking about the wounded masculine, the shadow masculine, the wounded masculine that's trying to dominate and control everything. People is trying to control masses of people because he's wounded and he doesn't trust. He doesn't love himself. He doesn't trust that he's good enough. And so he's constantly trying to control everything. And people don't like that. People don't want to be controlled.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the wounded masculine is this sense that I'm not in control, so because of that, I don't have stability, and so because of that, I have to control everything else because I'm afraid that otherwise I'll crumble.
Yeah.
Where the true masculine, if I'm understanding you properly, is being so confident in your spiritual nature and so stable in that conscious presence that you can be truly transparent and you can relinquish the control and allow, I've heard it called let life storm on you, where you're deeply anchored like a tree with super deep roots. You're just there being the presence of the tree, bearing fruit, providing shade, but completely unflappable by whatever weather might approach you.
Right. Unflinching in the face of chaos, like being totally still. Some masculine practices I do, for example, is basically I just stand with my knees bent and it's called the tree pose. And you just sit here. It's basically, it looks like you're hugging a tree with your arms. So your arms are in like a circular motion. And then you just hold this stance for like a certain amount of time, 15 minutes or until you're like shaking and like, you know, your body's telling you to give up, to like stop, but you just keep staying solid.
Interesting.
And a metaphor in your relationship is if you're the masculine partner and you have a highly feminine partner, how still can you be in those moments of when your partner is just in pure chaos, when she's freaking out, when she's a mess, when it seems like everything's falling apart? Can you still hold it together?
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that I attempt to do, to just be kind of really steady in my knowing that we're going to figure, if I don't have a good grasp on, if there's a lot of unknowns, just having a knowing that we're going to be able to figure it out, even though we may not know how we're going to do it, and being really strong in that knowing, and then allowing my partner, or a lot of times this polarity of feminine, masculine shows up in my employees. You know, even with masculine employees, they are not strong in their masculinity or their knowing, or their sense of confidence as a being. And so I'm really trying to instill in them their own self-worth and their own ability to make their life happen the way that they want to happen. And a big part of that is learning how to hold enough space for them to have a complete breakdown, and not feeling triggered where I need to judge them for that. Yeah. And letting them come out the other side of that experience. And I'm not always great at it. But more and more, I'm trying to allow people to have their experience, and knowing that if they vividly have whatever experience they're having in that moment, even if it's an absolute freak out, that on the other side of that, they'll feel better, and pieces will be connected for them if they're allowed to have that. You know, it's almost like when a toddler's throwing a temper tantrum. Yeah. It's better to let them have the whole temper tantrum and completely feel through it and come out the other side, than to try to oppress them and control that because somehow you feel embarrassed by what they're doing. And I think for me, I try to treat all of reality like it's a 2-year-old approaching me. And I want to be the conscious father when I feel that's appropriate.
Absolutely. That's a good way to approach life. Because in that scenario, as a parent with your child, if you're the parent that is like, oh, you're crying. Okay, let me get you some whatever this, and like what can I do to make you feel better? Then right there and then you're instilling codependence. Yeah. Depending on someone else for your happiness and well-being, basically, and not sourcing it for yourself. But if, like you said, if you do the more masterful way, that is honestly for the greater good of everyone in that room, or my mentor even used to say the entire universe. Yeah. For the greater good of everything. Fully giving them complete unconditional love and ability to have their own experience entirely.
Where's the balance between being strongly rooted in wanting to allow someone to have their own experience, and utilize reality as a catalyst event for them to be able to feel their own shortcomings and then move through those? You know, where's the balance between letting that experience happen and being empathetic towards that experience and maybe stepping in at some point? Like, is there a time where empathy calls for us stepping in and helping carry someone else's burdens?
That's a really good point. Yeah, this relates to my journey of learning and growing, because ever since I learned about the masculine and feminine, I learned like, okay, I'm more of kind of a masculine being. So, all right, then I'm just stoic all the time. You know, I'm just holding space all the time for the feminine around me. Yeah. But then it got to the point where that got really boring, because then I'm just like, oh, I'm just still all the time, and this is actually boring. Yeah. And I'm actually getting to the point where I'm actually not happy. So then learning how to kind of dance more, like actually allow myself to even experience me fully in my feminine, which then actually allows me to have a stronger masculine too.
Right.
I did this like super creative, ridiculous dance this morning, and it was like super fun and freeing, and that's okay.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what it looks like when you're in your feminine? Because I think especially for people who are just coming into the conscious awareness of energetic polarity, it can be difficult to be like, well, I'm a man. Like, how can I be a female? That's not what we're talking about. This isn't a biological gender thing. This is the energetic quality where there's a masculine quality and a feminine quality. Can you talk about what how the feminine quality maybe manifests in you when you're more in your feminine than your masculine?
Yeah, so the feminine is like pure creativity, pure expression, creative expression. And allowing myself to go completely into the unknown, which is also the definition of vulnerability. So it's often really scary, and it takes courage. So this morning, what being in my feminine was dancing. Dancing is a very feminine thing to do. Just like moving my body around and just flowing with it. And I was actually talking on camera too a little bit. So just allowing the words to come to me, not trying to control.
Being spontaneous.
Yeah, completely spontaneous. And in that instance, just doing whatever felt good. Whatever, I'm just going to go into a state of joy and just do whatever I want to do right now.
Yeah. That's interesting. And then what is your masculine like when you're fully in your masculine?
Oh, when I'm fully in my masculine. Okay. I vividly remember a moment when I felt, I think, maybe most in my masculine than I've ever felt before. Oh my God. It was an extremely magical feeling. I hope every man can experience this in his life, but it was at a men's retreat. It was by one of my mentors, Jon Ray, and I think we did a good 30 minutes of breath work, and we sat in front of another man and just did breath work for about 30 minutes. And then afterwards we just sat in pure stillness for a good, maybe 20 minutes. And I've never felt this to this degree before. I felt this pure potential, pure masculine potential. And it felt like I almost saw it visually too. It's pretty trippy. It felt like there was this room of ancient warriors, just completely still, like the most badass fuck you up warriors in the world. We're all in this room and we're completely still.
Yeah.
Just pure potential. You would not want to fuck with these guys.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've circling back to, talking about the word meek and that kind of interpretation of meek, where meek means being really in your warrior stance and how to use your sword, but you don't have to. You keep it sheathed. And it's almost like that's what you're describing the pure masculine as being, is this level of knowing your potential and knowing that you're capable of achieving your potential, and knowing that everyone else is capable of that as well, and holding that potential in space and pointing to it energetically. Maybe that's what a good coach does, is they're able to see the potential in someone and hold the space for someone to have an awareness of that.
Yeah. I would say, let's say just for fun, the most powerful warrior in the room, let's say, is not going to be the one that starts a fight.
Right.
He's going to be completely still. And if anything, he's going to be the one that dismantles the fight.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like so much of their masculine energy has moved into a state of wisdom that they're no longer reactionary in it, and they can see how to diffuse situations at the most subtle levels so that they never escalate into something that seems chaotic in nature, because chaos would be more of a feminine quality, or the unhealed masculine. And again, I think that it can be difficult to talk about this sometimes, especially if someone is new to these terms, and be seen somewhat as, oh, they're being sexist. They're calling the feminine, chaotic, and saying that the masculine is the only stable ones. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that everyone has both masculine and feminine qualities, and we have the ability to activate different frequency levels of those qualities depending on what the situation calls for. And in your particular relationship, it sounds like the balance of those energies that you like is you more strongly in your masculine and your partner more strongly in her feminine. And because of that, it creates this energetic pull to one another. But what I'm saying is that any man or woman can show up as hyper masculine or hyper feminine in the quality of their energy. And we have the ability to dial those things up and down depending on what a scenario calls for. And so I'm not ever trying to be sexist or putting women down or putting men down, because those qualities exist within every being. And I think that that's an interesting awakening to have. And maybe that's what some of what we're seeing in reality is pointing towards, is this idea that feminine energy can exist in a male body and masculine energy can exist in a female body, and not because it's a female trapped in a man's body, but because there are different levels of masculine and feminine within both of us that we can dial up and down. And then we have maybe natural proclivities to a certain frequency level of those energies. Is there a war on alpha males?
Ooh, a war on alpha males. What do you think?
I think that I liked the way that you described the injured masculine. Is that what you called it?
The
wounded masculine.
Shadow masculine.
Because I do think that there is a war on the wounded masculine.
Yeah.
And there should be. But unfortunately, because as a society, we haven't given ourselves the language or the context to talk about these things at the subtle level that I think they happen, which is this more energetic level of polarity. A lot of times I think that all men get lumped into the wounded masculine category.
Right.
And that can be disheartening to someone who is really doing the work to heal that wounded masculine and to be more in the true authentic masculine. And maybe that's where the work that you're doing shows up, is as we're giving people language to talk about this and giving people a tool set to deal with this, maybe there doesn't have to be so much projection or labeling of right and wrong. And maybe we can recognize that the healing happens within all of us, both male and female biologically, and male and female energetically. Because again, there is that male and female component in all of us. I'd be curious to hear how that plays out for you, in these times as a white male. Where does the conversation of being a conscious man show up when there's so many people who want to identify as a victim?
Oh, that's such a huge topic. Well, I will say the women that are waking up, and those are a lot of our clients because Amanda works with single women. The women that are waking up are really, really craving conscious men. Like they're so hungry for it. Now, what is a conscious man even? That's a whole another topic. We should probably have other people would probably want to debate it too. But I think culturally, in our culture right now, and definitely in the past generation, what we think of masculinity is not very accurate. I think what culturally we think of masculinity is more of just a man who's very in his primal brain, who's like, yeah, strong and maybe aggressive,
but almost like a seek and
goes after what he wants,
seek and destroy type attitude.
Yeah, and very black and white. Like, you're either the victim or you're the freaking leader or whatever. It's like black and white, and it's harsh, very harsh in that manner. Yeah. And so I think a lot of women have been deeply wounded by that energy, by this really immature but powerful masculine who's powerful on this 3D plane, can make a lot of damage, can also maybe even accomplish a lot of things, but is immature emotionally and doesn't respect all beings the way they should be. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that I'm exploring right now is what happens after we die, and is there a quality to our soul that continues on, and do the actions that we partake in this physical experience have ramifications in some kind of an afterlife? And the sense that I get through some of the work that I'm interested in, AJ Miller being someone who I think has put this into the right context for me right now, is that there is this soul aspect of us that continues on after our physical life. And depending on the choices that we're making right now, we are either heightening or diminishing the quality of that soul experience or that soul entity that we move through the afterlife or the astral world or the spiritual realm as. And because reality is responding to this law of attraction event, in physical reality, the law of attraction can be manipulated in a certain way where you're not always seeing immediate feedback of what your true soul stance is, because you can build so many systems and barriers to protect you from your true soul stance that you're not getting an accurate mirror from reality anymore. And I think a lot of people in their wounded masculine are so good at building infrastructure that prevents reality from showing them their true soul space, that the sense that I get is that when they die, they are terrified at the place that they end up, not because there's this place called heaven or hell, but there's this huge spectrum of experience. And if reality is designed to show you where your shortcomings are so that you can become transparent to light, you will immediately manifest in the astral realms or the spiritual realms something that is much more a mirror presence to and a catalyst event to what you need to clear. And if you've been a total douchebag on Earth, you're going to end up in this place where you have to go through an experience of having empathy for all of the people that you victimized. And that's not an eternal thing. That's the catalyst event that is designed to help you clear the energetic blockages that you've created in your soul. And so nobody has to stay in a place of eternal damnation forever, but you have to move into certain levels of experience designed to help you clear the blockages that you've created. And to me, that's a helpful context to know how I should relate to reality, because if I'm truly letting reality inspire me and viewing it as a mirror, then whether I'm reading something in a newspaper or having an experience of it with my intimate partner, those are all mirror events that are showing me where certain energetic blockages are within me that prevent me from dimensionally navigating in as fluid a way as maybe I want to. So all of that to say that I do think that part of the awakening experience is having a new metaphor to describe this larger reality that exists beyond what we call our physical vehicle. And I'd be curious to hear, in addition to how you're navigating physical reality, do you have any sense or perceptions on what is beyond that? Or is there a metaphor that you use to interpret that?
Yes, I have actually been recently studying the different dimensions. Let's see, from memory. Well, there's a lot of videos and articles online that talk about the ascension process.
So what is that?
Many people believe that in the cosmos, Earth, ever since 2012, and the Mayans predicted this, we've moved into a different, I don't even know what to call it, actually. We've moved into a different energy, where you might have also heard the feminine is rising now. Spiritual teachers, spiritual leaders are saying that. We're in the time of the feminine now. And I'm no expert on this, but I see a lot of evidence of this.
So what is that? Rising. What kind of evidence are we talking about?
So many women are so committed to creating right now, to creating their own businesses, to being leaders. I see this directly in our business right now. Most of our clients are women. And honestly, from my point of view, the women seem way more committed than the men to be on this awakening personal development journey, to become awake to everything that we are. In my direct experience, more women are buying our programs, which are all about helping them awaken and be the divine creators that they are, create their own businesses, and attract their partner.
Is that just because the landscape is ripe right now for you? Basically, the gender democratization of reality. Most of the barriers, legally speaking, have been removed, and so, do you think that is the result of physical manifestations and a response to that, or were those physical manifestations the response to this energetic shift?
I'd say both. I think it's a feedback loop. Yeah.
And so as we're having this more vivid experience of, okay, this is me in my physical body, and this is the environment that I'm interpreting as reality. What are some of the practices that you use to have an understanding of maybe what exists outside of perception, and how do you explore something that can't be seen or is unknown?
Well, what I've learned is that in my particular body, I think I'm a big studier of a system called human design, and it basically shows how each one of us has a completely unique design. Absolutely unique. And so I believe we all have a very different experience of reality, depending on our design. And me in particular, what I've learned about me is that I am a very intuitive feeling being. I feel a lot of things. I feel the energy in the room. I feel connection with another person. Before I realized that, I experienced a lot of pain because I was in my head all the time, and I wasn't listening to my feeling body. And so the more I listened to these like subtle at first, very subtle feelings at first when I was first learning how to navigate reality in a more beneficial way. Every time I followed these like instincts, these feelings, it always kind of opened a door for me. Led me to connect with an amazing person that I never would have connected with otherwise.
Yeah.
Led me to my mentor, and things like that.
What's your human design?
Yeah, so in human design, I'm a projector. I'm a 2/4.
So for those maybe not familiar with human design, I'll give my spiel on what I think it is. So you might be familiar with astrology. Astrology is kind of a reading of the planetary systems, and as energy is coming from the great solar sun in the center of the universe, that energy has to move through all of the galaxies and planetary systems. And so astrology is kind of mapping how that energy, maybe magnetically and electronically, passes from this black hole in the center of the solar system to our Earth, and how it moves through all of these planetary structures. And based on where those planets are, the frequency of that energy is different. And so then that frequency interacts with our own magnetic field, because our heart acts as this power plant, and any power source is going to give off a magnetic field, and that magnetic field, when in relation to other magnetic fields or electrical systems, then creates a certain frequency stance that we then interpret as physical reality. So human design is taking astrology, and then it's taking a practice from like the I Ching, which has all of these different gates and basically ways of querying reality through chance. It takes elements from I Ching, it takes elements from astronomy, it takes elements from quantum theory of how like binary systems within quarks respond, and it's a metaphor for interpreting how all of these different forces and energies outside of us, plus the conscious quantum computer of reality, respond with our energetic systems. And all of us have this kind of circuit board of energy inside of us. And when you see a human design chart, it even looks like a diagram for a circuit board. Yeah. And within the circuit board of our own physical body, energy runs through it in a loop, but within that loop are different stopping stations where energy is more potent. And in each of those stations, that's either turned in an on position or an off position. And when it's in an off position, that means that the circuit can't be completed unless we come into contact with someone else who has that particular part of their system in the on position. So let's say one of the circuits in my head is in an off position, which in human design, I believe they would call that having an open space. Open, yeah. And so if my head is open, then I'm going to be really drawn to somebody who has that same circuit filled in on them, because when I'm with them, they complete my circuit and they allow my thinking and my energy to be more holistic. And so a lot of times in relationships, the best relationships, maybe best is a subjective word, but interesting relationships can be where if I have an opening in my heart and an opening in my head, and my partner has those circuits that are full in their head and heart, then we create a completion that completes both people's circuits, and the magnetic draw and the inspiration that comes within that relationship is heightened. So when we're talking about what our human design is, I'm a manifestor 5/1, or a manifesting generator 5/1, and you're a projector 2/4. So basically what we're talking about is which circuits are open and closed in our body. And I don't know enough about it to know what the relationship between you and I's systems would be. But a projector is very much somebody who is wholly open, right?
Well, open in a specific area.
Yeah.
The sacral.
And so people who are really open in their sacral tend to be very good listeners, right? And tell me a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, very good listeners. we're really good guides.
Mm.
We're here to help guide people. We, according to human design, our aura is penetrating. So I can see really deeply into people usually. I can get really subtle intuitions about them. I can also see where they're out of alignment, like really quickly. I can see where they're not using their energy efficiently, which can be really helpful for like business and the way that they work and the decisions that they're making every day. I think that's one way I really help Amanda in our business is I can see all the areas where she's not being efficient, and she's a generator. So projectors and generators have a specific kind of a special relationship where the projector is perfectly designed to guide them in their work, especially.
Yeah, so for those listening, if this is interesting to you and you want a tool to be able to maybe understand some of your natural tendencies a little bit better, you can just Google free human design chart, and there's a bunch of different websites where you put in your birthday time and location of birth, and it will generate this chart and show you what basically this human design energetic map is. And then there's a bunch of different interpretations that you can either purchase or find for free online. But again, it's an interesting mirror that we have to be able to understand where some of our blind spots are. And to me, I've never bought into this idea that your astrology or your human design or whatever system you're using to interpret your energy, that has to be the end all be all definer of who you are. But it can be a very interesting tool for determining where are my flaws that maybe I can't see. What are the blind spots? And in that way, I really like human design, not only when I'm working with clients to help them see their own blind spots, but to help me see my own, and to also understand maybe how my human design shifts, because I do think that it does, especially in this new energy. I think that everybody's astrology and human design is somewhat shifting, and that we do have more conscious control over how those energies align than maybe the systems as written give us credit for.
Sure, I wouldn't be against that. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, human design has especially, I'd say the number one thing, it's helped me learn how to understand myself and to be more accepting of my true nature.
Yeah.
And I've always been a really good listener, for example, and I haven't necessarily been like the big stage presence or whatever. I'm much more of a one-on-one person, and literally human design says projector, you should do more one-on-one relating with people instead of in groups.
Interesting.
Which is really interesting because, it's fascinating. It just, it's very difficult for a projector to get a group's attention.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's useful information to have. One, so you can move beyond those barriers, and two, so you can understand how to work within your own strengths and weaknesses. And I guess what we're talking about is like there's so many tools and systems and metaphors available to interpret reality. And one of the reasons that I've been so heavily drawn to exploring all of these tools is because I'm interested in the concept of truth and what is true and what isn't, and is there a right way of living? And, the internet, I think, has done us a service and a disservice in that it has made so many more perspectives available, and it has allowed us to reach people in a way that we never would have been able to before. But at the same time, it has blurred and muddied the lines of what is real and what isn't real, because you can almost find evidence for anything that you want to believe in. So, I know you to be a seeker of truth, and I think people who are like inherent seekers are really interesting. I'd be curious to understand, like, how are you seeking out truth? What does that process look like? And what are some of the truths that you're uncovering that you feel are giving you a different perspective on life.
Yeah. So what I've learned is to trust my intuitive feelings. That's really, I believe truth is actually an experience. And the more we're getting bombarded with information, like you said, we can find information on anything and get evidence of anything, just about. Conspiracy theories that the Nazis have a base on the other side of the moon, on the dark side of the moon.
I've not been there, so I'm not going to completely dismiss it.
But where was I going? Okay, so yeah, I mean, in my experience, at the end of the day, it's like we can get information about anything. I think the most important thing is to decipher, does this information help improve my life? Does it help me become a better person or not? Is this information benefiting me or not? Because if it's not, if it's making you angry or like miserable, then I don't think it's benefiting you in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. It's a relational in that way, where I agree that it almost doesn't matter if it's true, because something that's completely untrue can still serve a purpose in your life. I see this a lot of times when I'm going down different conspiracy rabbit holes online, which is an incredibly fun thing to do.
It is, actually.
But at the same time, it's important to not buy into everything and ask, why do I feel like this is relevant to me? Because there's been some wacky ass conspiracy theories where I was like, this really feels important to me, but how could this possibly be true? Yeah. And I never got to the bottom of whether it was true or not. But what was more interesting was honoring the fact that going down that rabbit hole felt important in that moment. And there have been plenty of times where I was like, this is totally real. Holy shit. Like, I'm going to blow the lid on this. And as I went deeper and deeper and deeper into it, I ended up coming out the other side being like, oh, I see. That wasn't real. But I thought it was. But I had to allow myself to go fully through the rabbit hole and come out the other side to have a tangible experience, an actual experience of why it wasn't real versus it just being an intellectual debate. And I think that a lot of information is that way. It may not be the end-all be-all truth, but in that moment, it's the catalyst required to move you into a certain position where then you can get the truth. And so I always just try to honor that intuitive feeling like you're talking about. And I always say, well, I don't know if this is true, but I know it's where I should be right now.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a healthy skepticism, to have that skill, and to also not be too naive too. And I also think it's important to learn from mistakes once again. I think it's important to learn to be too naive and then learn from that, and then also learn to be too skeptical too, because then you can find where you're really at. Yeah,
and one thing that inspires within me is that it is important to share whatever conspiracy theory you're into right now, because if you don't share it, you won't get the feedback required to know whether it's true or not. And when you share the thing that's resonating with you, reality will immediately give you feedback that is necessary for you to properly navigate that topic. And so anytime there's a fear of, should I share this? It might not be that, oh, I can't share this because it's so true and people aren't ready for it, which is sometimes how we interpret it. It could be this actually isn't true and you're afraid of having your bubble burst, or you're afraid of looking stupid. But the only way to know for sure is to let reality give you that feedback, and then determine, as you feel through that feedback, does this still feel important, or does it give me new information that sways me from it? Not that you ever want somebody to convince you of something that you feel should be true, but you do want that feedback to act as a catalyzing mechanism to show you where your energetic blockages are, and then clarity can come out of feeling that feedback.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in the blogs that I've written where, maybe 10 years ago, if I was writing a blog post about certain metaphysical things, I would get so much negative feedback in the comments section, and it was showing me how insecure I was about what I'm talking about. And now, as I talk about the same issues, there's never any negative feedback because reality doesn't need to give me that catalyst anymore because I've already worked through those insecurities.
Absolutely.
Now, what's maybe what's your current rabbit hole that you're down, or deep truth that you're into, or what's something that's important to you right now?
Oh, yeah, that's always a great question. What's important? Yeah, that's one thing I was gonna say. Is you can find information about just about anything these days. But I think one of the most important things to ask is this relevant to my life? Is this even important to me? Because otherwise, I could spend my whole life going down a rabbit hole and then looking back and being like, why the fuck did I just get so lost in that? So it's important to have like a centering, daily grounding process where you kind of get in touch with what's important.
Yeah, because there is a level of escapism that happens when you go down those YouTube rabbit holes where it's almost serving an insecurity that maybe you don't feel like you have a place in society. Yeah. And so there's a little bit of an egocentric nature to conspiracy theories where you feel self-important because you know something that nobody else knows.
Yeah.
And I always try to keep that in check. Am I really interested in this because it seems relevant and it seems like something that is important to follow for my own growth? Or am I doing this just because I want to have knowledge that nobody else has and I want to feel self-important?
Totally. Yeah, I won't say that I haven't been guilty of that. But in terms of one conspiracy theory, I guess you could say, definitely very controversial topic. And out of all the videos and content I've ever made, is the most popular of the people, let's say, that got the most attention, which was totally unexpected for me, is circumcision. And basically it started off 2 years ago. I listened to this podcast about why do boys get circumcised? And so this guy interviewed an expert in the field. I think this guy, he just knows a lot about like the history of circumcision. And anyways, it took me down a rabbit hole that was.
So what is that history? Because that is, it's something that, I'm circumcised, and I think a lot of people in Western culture are, and we don't really, it's one of those things that doesn't get questioned because it happens at such a young age, and so many, it's like, oh, well, that's just something that modern medicine must have created, but it doesn't come out of modern medicine. It comes out of other practices, right? What can you give us a brief overview of kind of why that practice became prevalent?
Okay. Well, I just watched a 2-hour presentation on this from I think he was a student at Harvard, he was at Harvard. He did this extremely, in my opinion, extremely courageous presentation at Harvard about the origins of circumcision. And I think the video is taken down now. His name is Eric Klopper. Ever since he made this presentation, Harvard fired him. I believe because it's such a controversial topic. And
what was controversial about it?
Well, he talked about the origins of where it comes from. So according to Eric Klopper, and he's done a tremendous amount of research into this, very smart guy in my opinion, also kind of crazy at the same time.
Okay.
he learned that circumcision came from a Jewish tradition, ancient. I think it actually, according to him, it stemmed from, God, this is why it's controversial. It stems from actually human sacrifice. In the oldest records that it sounds like he was able to find. And instead of doing human or animal sacrifice, then they started just cutting off part of the penis. And he has quotes from ancient texts from these rabbis who would say quotes like, this is not a direct quote. I actually get the direct quotes. Would you like me to?
Yeah, if you want to, while you're talking about it, you can find it. I think what's interesting about the topic is that we're talking about something that had a particular purpose many, many years ago. And so one of the interesting things that we do as humans is we as the basis for living, use wisdom found in all of these ancient texts. And we kind of repurpose ancient wisdom in a modern form. And I'm always questioning, okay, well, what was the initial or original intention thousands of years ago when this was written? And is that still the intention, or are we utilizing it in a different way? And what is the bridge between the present and the past in how we're utilizing certain information? And so a lot of times when you go down these conspiracy rabbit holes, one of the things that I see play out a lot is that we're taking the way that something was utilized thousands of years ago, and we're assuming that that's still the reasoning or the intention behind why it's being used. And the question then becomes, if the initial intention thousands of years ago was manipulative in some way, does that mean that the practice itself now is still manipulative? Does it still carry that energy, or has it changed form, and can the intention be different now?
Yep, that's a great question. So I have these quotes from these rabbis. So this was by Philo Judaeus. He was a rabbi in 30 AD. He says, circumcision is a symbol of two things necessary to our well-being. This is what they believed. One, the excision of sexual pleasure, and two, to check a man's pride. And we have another quote here from Moses Maimonides in 1180 AD. He says, quote, "The bodily pain is the real purpose of circumcision. One of the reasons is to bring about a decrease in sexual intercourse and a weakening of the organ. The fact that circumcision reduces sexual pleasure is undeniable."
So why is this particular topic, does it feel so relevant to you right now?
Well, when I made a video about it 2 years ago, I was literally just basically honestly sharing my my process and my reactions after listening to this podcast about the effects of circumcision on the human, the male psyche and emotional body and physical body. Many of the things are, it decreases your sensitivity. It drastically reduces your sensitivity and your sexual experience. And it drastically decreases the woman's experience as well. Let's see if I can remember basically things like men can have a more heightened experience physically, sexually. They can usually perform better. I think it's pretty common to hear in our society how like men don't last long enough, and women are like, it's just like wham bam, thank you, man, and then the woman's left, not fully satisfied. There's actually studies that show that women are less satisfied with circumcised men.
So when you're approaching a subject like this, because it's one of those things for me where it's like all the statistical data, and I don't know the numbers, so I don't know if this is an accurate statement, but let's assume that there's a subject matter and it comes to light that the statistical data shows that this is a negative practice, but then there is countering data that says, but there are some people who are the anomaly and have a completely different experience. And so one of the things that I'm always trying to interpret is how important is change at a mass consciousness level versus at the individual level, and how tied up in shifting things at a mass consciousness level do I want to become? Because does getting so heavily involved in pulling an elephant up a mountain affect my ability to control my own experience right now, or to have a pleasant experience right now? And so the interesting thing on one of the posts that I saw that feels relevant about this is that when they did a brain scan on a child before they were circumcised and after they were circumcised, and basically what showed up was that before they were circumcised, there were certain areas of the brain that were much more open and flowing, and aligned with, I guess, I'm butchering probably with the study, but aligned with a more sensitive nature. After the circumcision, certain areas of the brain that were more reptilian and aligned with aggression and things like that lit up, and then they never went back to the normal state.
Oh my God.
And so if we're saying that who I am as an adult is an extrapolation of the mental and energetic patterns that I form when I'm a child, then maybe part of the issue of patriarchy, as it's negatively defined, comes from this practice. Maybe. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case, but I am saying that there's enough interesting data pointing to a revelation like that maybe it seems important to explore and to consciously check in with myself to see, do I have any emotional trauma or injuries from that event in my own life that I need to work through? And, it's an interesting question. And just like everything, it can be a mirror that I use to explore, am I some way that is inauthentic because a certain traumatic event happened to me? And this doesn't necessarily have to be circumcision. It could be any traumatic event from our past. By exploring how that event patterns out into the rest of our lives, we can more delicately interpret the lens through which we're showing up and through which we're perceiving reality. And a good gut check from time to time on is that traumatic event still patterning itself in the way that I perceive or create reality can be a good thing sometimes. And so that's kind of how I see this is, well, I can't go back and be uncircumcised, but maybe I'll be more conscious if I am ever in a position where I'm making that decision for a child. Maybe I'll think twice before I do that. I'll look more into the ramifications, and then make sure that, if my child or a child I know is circumcised, that when it's age appropriate, that they make sure they're properly tuning into that trauma and understanding potentially how it has patterned the experiences that they've had. Yeah. What do you feel some of the relevance is?
Well, when I looked into it, it blew my mind. According to the information that I've looked at in the studies, let's see. Let me look at this. Well, okay. Circumcision removes up to 1/3 of the sensations of sexual pleasure and things like that. It's let's see. If I'm really vulnerable, I experienced in my early 20s like erectile dysfunction, and I thought something was horribly wrong with me. And it was a really scary situation to be in because I felt like I was all alone. I felt like no one else was experiencing this, all the psychological things that would happen if you think you're the only one that's going through pain. And anyways, that's, a symptom that showed up for me. Also, there's all these other symptoms that apparently circumcision affects, and it affects men psychologically, it affects them emotionally. There's a man by the name of Ronald Goldman. He was the guy whose interview I listened to, and he helps men overcome basically the ramifications, the symptoms that and the damage that's caused from circumcision. And according to him, his patients struggle with things like anger and shame and distrust, grief, sexual anxiety, reduced emotional expression, avoidance of intimacy, depression. So all those things are definitely things that I've dealt with a lot in my past.
Do you think that, anytime I come into new information like this that has a massive societal effect, I'm always trying to ask myself, well, am I just viewing the part of society that is having a problem with this? Is there a part of society that isn't having a part of it? And have we even done the proper studies to know how this has reverberated into society? Because one thing that I'm always trying to check in with myself on is, am I using this thing as a way to not have to feel into my own feelings about other things in my life? Like, is this a convenient excuse for me? Because especially with erectile dysfunction and any type of sexual experience gone awry, there can be deep embarrassment that comes along with that. And I've definitely experienced that. And I think a lot of men have. And what I always say to people who, and I'm not saying you're having this experience, but it just has brought this up into the light of my mind, is that I always want to make sure that before we say, yeah, this is the issue, we're dealing with the underlying emotions of why we even think the issue is important. And, when you list out all of those things like grief, depression, you're saying, oh, those are all things that I dealt with. And so you're drawing a relevance to it because you're resonating with the way other men who have had this are experiencing. And I just want to be careful that we're recognizing that, certainly things like this, any physical trauma can create a symptom that is undesirable, but the physical trauma is, at least in my experience, is not as important as the emotional trauma, and the emotional trauma can always be healed. And so I want to make sure that, as I'm doing my more research into this, and maybe watching some of the podcasts that you've said were valuable to you and understanding it from a wholer context, I want to make sure that I'm really feeling into the emotional triggers that come up within me and using this as a catalyst to heal the emotional trauma instead of trying to blame the physical experience.
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. And I agree that's probably the most empowered way to handle this situation that we don't have control of right now. I think it just triggers something really deep inside of me because it's like, well, let's look at a little bit of history. Like now they call, like females used to be circumcised. And now they call it female genital mutilation.
Right.
When are things going to change? It's only a matter of time, I believe, where it's going to be called male genital mutilation.
Yeah. And it brings up an interesting concept of how much effect should we have in shifting things like this, and how much of our voice should be dedicated in resistance to something that currently exists. And I struggle with this a lot because I believe that it's more powerful to align with what you want than to be in resistance to what you don't. And the reason that change happens so slowly is because it's always a war against drugs and a war against this and a war against this, and the Illuminati is bad and the bankers are bad and the Democrats are bad. It's always against something, and so change happens at, it's like moving a cruise ship. It happens very slowly, where if we align with what we want, I want every man to feel sexually healthy and have an emotional state of health and well-being around their sexuality. Like when I align with that concept, I feel like there's an opportunity to move more quickly to what we want to see rather than railing against what we don't want. Now, knowing what we don't want is important. Abraham Hicks would call this the 3 steps towards manifestation. First, you know what you don't want. That's good. Knowing what you don't want shows you what you do want. So then you relax and you say, okay, I know what I do want now, and you put your attention towards what you do want, and then you let the universe or God or source or the law of attraction then deliver what it is that you do want. And you move out of step 1, which is recognizing the opposition, and you move into more of allowing the thing that inspired you to desire.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't even enjoy talking about this topic very much. It's just, I've noticed that a lot of people are hungry for this, or to learn about this. Is it because
it's controversial, or is it because, I guess what I'm grappling with is, what does an effective mass movement look like? And it is much easier to rally the troops around a common enemy than it is around a common goal. And so do we need to identify enemies and then rail against them in order to see massive change? Or is there some strategy that allows us to mobilize people around a positive goal, what we want versus what we don't want?
That's why, ideally, if I continue to speak more about this topic, I would use it as kind of, I guess a way to gravitate attention of people who are in pain and need support, and then give them an empowering solution to whatever problems or pains they're dealing with.
Yeah. So what does that solution look like?
Yeah, I actually wrote notes about this, but definitely, in my opinion, what not to do is play victim and point the finger and just build more and more rage and aggression towards the power that stripped you of your part of your body.
Yeah.
And one of the most common, according to the research, one of the most common reactions to after men learn about the ramifications of being circumcised is rage. Like just so much rage. And I've met a man who is in that state, and he is so stuck in his anger and he's not letting it go, and it's tragic. So if there's anything I can do to support men, to help them, empower them from, instead of staying in the victim and just wallowing in depression and just boiling with rage and allowing it to completely take over their life and maybe even ruin a good life that they could have lived, then I would like to do whatever I can do to support with that. Because, the first time I realized that, of course I had to go through like kind of a emotional process around it, and it was really deep. And it's really strange when or maybe it's not strange, when I talk about this topic, I actually feel the part of me that's missing, like physically.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So I'm like, I think this is linked to emotionally and psychologically and all these things. And, maybe it's no wonder. I mean, if you look at the evidence in our culture, so many women are complaining. I mean, it seems like, where there's no good men, like all men are assholes or whatever. Well, if we're all stripped from our sensitivity right after birth against giving us even a choice, maybe, there's evidence right there why there's a lot of shadow masculine.
I'd be interested to see if the data plays out in a way where men who are uncircumcised actually, are more sensitive, and if women are having a different experience.
Yeah, I've talked to women. Absolutely, they say, it's night and day, and men as well. They're like, I've talked to men who say that they're so glad that they have their foreskin intact.
And is that a physical thing or an emotional thing? When you say women definitely can tell, are you talking about at a physical level or at the emotional level of sensitivity?
Oh, well, definitely what I've heard specifically is physically, like, I guess he can pleasure her better in terms of her experiences.
Yeah, because I think that's all relational. One of the things that I always hear, I'm sure that that's true. I'm not denying that fact. But one of the things that I've heard when people are talking about those living in poverty in a third world country, and they say, "Oh, I could never live like that. How could anybody live like that? We have to save all those people." And it's like, well, you could never live like that because relationally, you already have an experience of how much better life can be, but they don't have any other experience other than living in poverty. So they don't see it as near the detriment that we in the West do. Now, that's super controversial because in the West, we feel like we need to swoop in and save everybody, but maybe we're the ones that need to be saved by being able to confront our own emotional trauma and recognize all of the barriers and infrastructure and excuses that we use not to deal with our own trauma. Because relationally, I think that there is a case to be made that on a familial level, maybe people living in a third world country in poverty from our perspective are much richer in their life experiences of family and friendship and things like that. And so how do you design poverty? Maybe we're emotionally in poverty and they're financially in poverty, and which would you rather be in? And I think that translates to just about every topic. But with this one, it's also, if I've always been circumcised, then I'm never going to have an experience of how pleasurable sex could be if I wasn't circumcised. And so relationally, does it really even matter? Like, am I just inventing that, I'm lacking pleasure because of this? Because I have very pleasurable sex right now. And so if it's impossible for me to experience what it would be like if I weren't circumcised, does it really even matter to me? Because relationally, how would I know? Like my experience of pleasure is what it is. And, certainly I would be almost willing to bet that there are plenty of women who would say, I actually prefer a circumcised man. It's like the law of attraction is always going to line you up with who you have. So even if there's a deformity that was forced on you, how caught up should we get in it, I guess, is what I'm getting to. And for future generations, how do we maintain a stance that maybe puts it more into the individual's hands? Should we? Yeah. And then I'd also be interested to see what the medical reasons for it are, if there are any.
Exactly. And the more that I've looked into it, and there's still a lot more research to do, the more I look into it, the more it's just shocking to me personally. I mean, first and foremost, it just strikes me to the core as like morally and ethically wrong. And of course that could be debated or whatnot. To cut off a part of someone's body before they even have the ability to make their own decisions. And just, all the evidence I've looked into so far, I mean, only the U.S. is the only country in the world, apparently, that does it for medical reasons, quote unquote medical reasons. And then many parents' decisions about male circumcision are preconceived, which may contribute to the high rate of elective circumcision. So basically, there's proof that the number one reason fathers decide to circumcise their son is just because he's circumcised too. He's like, well, I was circumcised, so yeah, well, my son should be too. That's it. That's the logic.
I'm sure that that's true because we're very adverse to things that are different, which is what, this is probably a really interesting manifestation on a micro level of something that's happening at a macro level, which is us not wanting to change into a healthier format for relating to one another. And it's an interesting thought experiment, if nothing else, to be like, well, do I want my son to be circumcised? And what are the emotional reasons for that? Because that's an incredibly selfish thing to say. Because most people wouldn't have any context for making that choice other than it being completely subjective.
Yep.
And so just asking the question, if I had a son, do I want him to be circumcised? And why do I choose what I choose? Yeah. And exploring that, using that as a metaphor for exploring some of your own emotional trauma can be really interesting. And whether that filters out into reality as a whole or whether it's just a personal experience, maybe if all of us were using things like this that come up in our day-to-day as a mirror to explore our own emotional trauma, maybe the net result of that would be a society that's more cohesive and coherent with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's just when I look at the information, everything seems to kind of come together. I mean, with the potential effects of circumcision, your first sexual experience being one of extreme, fear, and then the effects of it, with it, according to this expert in this field who talks about, male aggression being one of the biggest things that come out of it. Then, with the current hatred of the patriarchy that we have in our society, maybe that shows why there's so much of this male aggression. What's done to, there's this quote, what's done to children, they will do to society. And so if you look directly at, what's happening if they get circumcised, and by the way, they don't always use anesthesia. So we could have completely viscerally experienced that experience and more than likely blocked it out because it was so extremely traumatic. But what's done, with my little bit of research about trauma, what the mind forgets, the body remembers. So it's stored in the body.
Yeah.
And I believe the emotional body and the psychology too. And so it's like, and if you put this on a whole, our society as a collective, like how does that, I mean, we see how it potentially affects an individual. Now, if we have a society that's mostly, made up of men who are circumcised, how does that affect an entire society?
Yeah.
And then you look at America, we're arguably an extremely aggressive, country with most of our money going into the army, and so much controversy around that. It's like, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, there's definitely an interesting correlation and enough there to continue to research it,
right.
And look into it. And, that's the thing with a lot of quote unquote conspiracies is that they often feel very relevant. And I get the sense that the reason they feel relevant has more to do with the personal emotional work that we need to do in that moment than it does society at a society level, because how do you change society except at the personal level? And so, it's a chicken or egg question. Do we have to stop? Do we dictate that we have to stop circumcising people, or do we give people the emotional toolbox to feel into why they would want to do it in the first place and let it happen from that emotional level, where by free choice they choose not to do it because that feels like the more loving thing to do versus it being mandated by law or something. And as I think about, what does future society look like, and how are we dictating things, I'm a huge proponent of shrinking government and having government not be there, and encouraging society as a whole to become more conscious so that society as a whole is making better decisions. Where I think that the opposite strategy is the government gets much bigger and mandates all of the moral and proper ways to be, and society doesn't ever change at a level of consciousness. Yeah. It just has more rules.
Right. Yeah, I just feel fascinated about this topic because it just, zooming in on it, it's like, here's one specific area where we're making a decision, or lack thereof a decision, or we're just being completely unconscious about it. Like, no one's even, it seems like no one really even questions this. I think only recently it's really starting to gain some steam, and I think I'm drawn to it. I'm not like super drawn to it, but part of me is drawn to it because it's just like, what is going on here? Like, this is really strange, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and the sense that I get with myself, and maybe you can confirm this with you, is that when there's a resonance like this to certain information, it's pointing to an even greater truth. It's like the resonance is drawing us into a window or lens that needs to be looked into so that we can see reality at its macro level from an even greater or more finite context. And so it's like, well, what does this, if reality is a metaphor for how we should be growing, maybe this thing of, okay, we are, cutting off the skin, or cutting off a piece of the body of an infant without their conscious consent, and we have no real good reasoning, and maybe we do, but I don't know what it is. For
the medical reasons are, of course, like, oh, so that it won't get infected later on, and we just want to cut it off now so that you don't even have to deal with that. And, oh, it's an increased causing cancer. But if you actually look at the actual research, it's actually pretty shocking how they just made those general statements.
Regardless, if we use it as a metaphor for understanding our emotional trauma personally and as a society, essentially what we're saying is society is making unconscious decisions that harm people at a very early age, and we're not even questioning
exactly.
it. and so that opens up a line of questioning that goes far beyond circumcision, because now all of a sudden you're like, well, where else are we doing this?
Exactly.
And that is an important question to ask, is, are the choices that I'm making loving in nature? And if they're not, why am I making them? Mm-hmm. And, that I think at a certain level has to be a personal journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is taking me to look at, I also look at other areas of society as well. And I'm actually planning on potentially writing a book, but the challenges that we face potentially as a human species right now with not just circumcision, but things like global warming, which I believe is real. I think the education in our country is horrific. our food is just the food that you get at the grocery store, a lot of which is toxic. It's like really bad for you. Healthcare is completely, I think, horrific as well. News and media brainwashing, mainstream, all leading to, potentially neglectful parenting. Anyways, I guess I just want to make the world a better place. And so I'm drawn to areas where I feel like as at a societal level, we're extremely out of alignment. And I see that as an opportunity to help others instead of just focusing on my own personal development all the time.
Yeah. Well, certainly there are issues at a macro level that need to be solved. And, I am always trying to ask myself, is there something that I can do that would be beneficial here outside of working on myself? And are my intentions for working on it that I want to be seen as a superhero who's saving the world, or are they actually genuine? And then I also am in great conflict with the idea that people need to be saved, because I don't believe they do. I believe that reality, through the law of attraction, is giving everyone exactly what they need to heal their emotional trauma. And that if we focus on healing our emotional trauma, the symptoms that you're listing, which are all of the physical manifestations of that emotional trauma, will just slowly move away, and we'll call it innovation. And over time, things will just get better because collectively we are dealing with the emotional trauma that those things were birthed out of. And so it's like, do we fix things at the infrastructure level, which I think is the symptom level, or do we fix them at the emotional level, where all of those manifestations came from in the first place? And again, it's that chicken or egg thing, where the sense that I get is when we deal with it at an emotional level, it naturally resolves at the physical level, and it almost isn't important what's happening at the physical level other than how it triggers me emotionally. Be curious to hear your thought on that.
Yeah, I mean, all those emotional symptoms that I mentioned, I've worked through a lot of, and I feel, very content with in my life currently. But then it's just like all the evidence, like I said, in the society around me, like I want to help people, like I want to make an impact while I'm here. And so it's like, if there's men who are suffering right now, I want to do what I can to support them or lift a helping hand, Yeah. I think I would like to help lift people up, but of course they have to be, feel worthy enough to receive support, and they have to want to get out of their current situation. I have noticed, especially in the community of people who really look deeply into circumcision, they tend to be really angry and really stuck there too. And I don't know, seems like a lot of them don't necessarily want to get out of it. So that would be a problem. I wouldn't be able to help them really.
Yeah, and that's an interesting awareness to have, because it's like, well, why are people like that drawn to this particular issue? And you have to wonder, is it because they're looking for an excuse to justify their anger so that they can continue to project it out?
Yeah, quite possibly, absolutely.
And so for me, it's all of these things seem important. Every symptom seems important, but not because I need to eradicate the symptom, but because the symptom is pointing to the emotional work that I need to do. And the message that I feel is valuable, no matter how you feel on any level, because a lot of the things that you mentioned as symptoms are very diverse topics and usually end up in more argument than solution. And where I think the common ground is, no matter what side of any of those issues you are, is that issue is triggering something within you, and you're feeling it. You're either not feeling an emotional connection to it at all, or you're feeling a deep emotional connection to it. And that emotional signal is showcasing to you how that event is acting as a catalyst for you to clear samskara, or energy blockages within you. And as we cleanse the energetic field using whatever events in society as the catalyst for that cleansing, maybe those events just naturally move into a more innovative place that serves us all more. But if reality is a mirror and there is deep, deep anger around sexuality or around masculinity, then maybe we need a signal like this circumcision issue to showcase that exists within us, because otherwise we wouldn't have an awareness of it. And so that's what I'm saying, is that I'm always trying to find the balance between, does this event need to be here? Like, should I eradicate it? Or is it, even though it's traumatic, pointing towards a deeper issue that society needs to have an awareness of? And that awareness is, I have so much anger around my sexuality that needs to be cleared, or I have whatever the trigger that comes up is.
That's what I believe this could be a great catalyst for. Is since it is such a controversial topic, I think it could be. Yeah, I think it could really. Honestly, the reason I'm really here, like in my meditations, like this is why I'm here. I'm here to like awaken humanity.
Yeah.
By whatever means necessary. So if this is a way that I could assist with that, through educating around, let's say circumcision, and then let's say it attracts a lot of men who are rageful and have this deep anger around their sexuality, then that could be a great starting point to help them through that, to help them feel all the emotions that are coming up, to help them, maybe we could be running retreats. I have a retreat coming up next month. And we can explore anger there. Yeah. We can really dive into these.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I really do think that reality calls us up into certain opportunities, and part of the emotional resonance that we have with certain things is part of that being called. And there's no right or wrong way to be called. You just know when you're being called in a certain direction, and it's important to just ask, how can I show up in the best way in this direction that I'm being lulled? And so, I never want to discourage anyone from exploring anything, because I do think that there's so many infinite levels of assisting people through their emotional trauma. And yet at the same time, my message, I always want to be, but make it about the emotional trauma and not the physical symptom, because the physical symptom can only be healed once everything at that energetic and emotional level is fully cleared. And then the infrastructure and the solutions that are born out of that clear energetic space will be far and beyond more beneficial to society as a whole. But we have to use these things that are coming up in our reality right now in the present moment as that mirror catalyst to show us how we can clear the energetic space and lock on to a more innovative solution. And to me, that's what coaching work is about. It is directing people towards solution.
Well, the first step to heal anything is awareness first.
I agree.
So that's where I think we're at with this particular aspect of society, you could say, where awareness is starting to come about around circumcision. Like, why the fuck are we cutting pieces of, people off at birth? So, and I think this will really start to take steam in the next few years. There's going to be a really big documentary coming out. Actually, a guy is creating it here in Austin. His name is Brandon. I think there's going to be a lot of awareness coming out about this topic, and it's going to be a controversial thing. And first step is awareness. So, and then after that, I think specifically you and I, the parts that we play potentially are to help with the emotional aspect of healing. As I do agree, I think that's really the core of this human experience is how we feel. And so, I'd like to continue to play that part with men's retreats and things like that. And
yeah. So, well, maybe this can be our final topic because we've been going for a long time. Yeah. I'd love to hear in your retreats kind of what that experience looks like and what people who decide to go can expect, and how are you helping people move through some of those emotional barriers in those retreats?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of modalities that I bring to these experiences, and a lot of it's related to actually what I learned here in Austin is authentic relating and circling, which are practices to be in a really present state with around other people, where you're fully expressing the emotions, even your body sensations, everything that you wouldn't normally express in a normal social setting. And experiencing kind of similar to what we were talking about in the beginning of our talk today, is like really being in the flow with each other and really giving each other direct feedback and being really honest and raw and real with each other, while also enjoying ourselves and allowing ourselves to be goofy, allowing ourselves to be feminine too. And there will be a lot of, different kind of workshops that we'll bring into it. Maybe one is we explore our feminine side, and another we explore our masculine side. I also allow some flow with it. Yeah. I kind of feel into the group energy and where it feels like things want to go next in the group energy. So I honestly don't know what's going to happen on this retreat coming up, but it's always a really incredible, memorable experience.
That's cool. So for people who want to learn more about your work and maybe keep up with some of the topics that you're passionate about, where can they find you online?
I'd say right now the best place is Facebook. Just search Jack Peterson.
Cool.
I'll be on there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, very interesting to hear your perspective, and I know that you're doing some really interesting work with both men and women, but it's been valuable to hear your perspective and to kind of see the world through the lens that you're perceiving reality. And so I appreciate the time that you've given and the perspective that you've shared, and I will put a link to your Facebook in the comments here on YouTube so people can stay in touch with you.
Cool. Well, I really enjoy this. And
awesome.
Thanks so much, Jon.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Bye.